Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
We're going to unpack a few of our discussions. I'm super excited about this discussion panel we have here with our distinguished guests. First, what I'm going to do is I'll introduce our guests, and then I'm going to kind of flip a question to them, and we'll just get the lay of the land, and then we're going to kind of do the interesting improvisational discussion piece back and forth. Okay, first, Heather Zichal, CEO of American Clean Power Association, formerly the Wind Energy Association, now massively scaled up to handle wind, offshore wind, solar, storage, transmission. Anything else? No,
that's more than enough.
Okay. So Heather has been working in environmental policy since 1998. She was the climate czar for President Obama. And Heather, I would just start by, can you give us a sense of the state of play right now in renewables, both wind and solar? And then maybe speak to some of the new policy initiatives that we might be seeing over the coming months.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I spent my entire career in Washington trying to make sure facilities like this could be constructed, but I've never got to spend much time going to them. So it's just a real honor to be here and to join you today. So the question of what's happening in Washington is a complicated one, and I will do the best that I can. The big question on everybody's mind is what's going to happen with this Build Back Better, or Build Back a Little Bit Better, or whatever name you want to give it, or otherwise known as reconciliation. So this is really what is important, and it was driving the opportunity to create certainty and predictability over the long term for the first time in this industry. And it does that through a variety of different tools, including long-term extension of the production and investment tax credits for wind, solar, and storage. Those are credits that we're obviously going to continue to fight for as an industry. And candidly, what's really great about the conversation happening inside the Beltway right now is while the reconciliation package hasn't gotten across the finish line, the pieces of the package that are assured and kind of well, it's going to have the climate package, plus we have to figure out what we're going to do with these other social programs. So the fact that Democrats in Washington, at least as it relates to the reconciliation package, are all kind of like, okay, the climate package is gold. Now we have to just figure out the rest of it. And obviously on top of that, the clock is ticking. We thought this would have happened last year. Then we thought it would happen before the State of the Union. And then we thought it would happen this summer. And now we're kind of looking at as we're heading into the July, looking down July 4th holiday, there's a lot of discussion happening around if it doesn't happen by July 4th, we're not likely to see this happen. So as ACP, we're doing everything we can to create political space for this legislation to be a reality. We're trying to make sure where there are questions from the key people that are going to be in the room when the decisions go down, that we are in close dialogue with them. Over the last, I would say, 4 days, the conversations are more real than they have been to date. There's actually paper being passed, et cetera. So I think that there's a path to get to yes on reconciliation. But at the same time, we also have to prepare for the fact that that might not happen. And in that world, we're going to be, sort of scrambling at the end of the year with an extenders package, which this industry knows a lot about. And we're going to have to work together to get as long of an extension of those tax credits and to jam as many new things as humanly possible into that extenders package.
Okay, that was really helpful. Also, Heather, can you just tell folks, American Clean Power Association, how many members there are, the type of constituency of them, and then just mention this amazing conference you just concluded this week, how many people were there and so forth?
Sure. So as a trade association that is a year and 5 months old, Dan had mentioned we kind of took what was left of the American Wind Energy Association. We then brought in the Energy Storage Alliance. We represent over 600 member companies, again, as Dan said, in wind, solar, storage, and transmission. It's the first time in Washington that we've collectively united all of the voices of clean energy technologies, which is really exciting because I do believe we are more powerful with one voice in Washington. And as somebody who's also spent a lot of time trying to understand what are the priorities and needs of the industry, I had to call about 65 people to figure out, in my previous careers, whether that was in the White House or in Congress, what does the industry actually need to be successful? And so now, my goal is to make sure that we are one-stop shopping and speaking with one voice and, a decisive voice on behalf of industry. As Shug mentioned, we just finished our Clean Energy Conference, which again was the first big conference with all energy technologies, and we had strong representation from all of them, and great speakers from cabinet secretaries to members of Congress talking about the relevant issues to the industry, and over 7,000 attendees. So it was a terrific event. I saw many faces there, and hopefully next year when we're in New Orleans, I will see you all there too.
Great. Thanks, Heather. And I do have the pleasure to serve on her board, and it's great to see that. Okay, we're going to move a little bit to technology and manufacturing. What we're looking at out there, those large black things, those are First solar panels. And I'd like to tell you a little story about my connection to the company. I was a young engineer in 1991, and I went to Toledo, Ohio for a job interview with a company called Solar Cells, Inc. And I met a gentleman named Harold McMaster who had created Glass Tech and then Glass Tech Solar and then Solar Cells, Inc., which eventually became First Solar. And the technology in the gut of that panel is kind of mind-blowing. The panel to the left of that is the little blue solar panel. We use that small solar panel to actually drive the trackers. That's a sample of the Nextracker tracker. If you look at the cells, they're crystalline cells, and they're actually made, they're cut, they're diced, and they're soldered together. And it takes a while to do that. It takes some energy, and they're about 150 microns thick. George will correct me if I'm wrong, but the thin film module panel to the right of it, it's only about 1 micron thick. If you add up all the semiconductor material in there, it's like less than 1 cubic centimeter of material, and the film goes down in like 15 seconds. And so it's orders of magnitude faster and lower embodied energy content. Both kinds of technologies have their merits, but this is an American success story. Mr. McMaster had built the machines that bent glass for automobile windshields. So I couldn't get my wife to move to Toledo, but we've stayed friends with the company ever since. And today, many of the systems we're building in the United States use First Solar technology. First Solar is the largest solar company in the United States by a long shot. George has been involved as Chief Operating Officer, Chief Commercial Officer, many other duties at the company. You have 3 decades of experience in semiconductor, George. It's really a privilege that you joined us today. Thank you very much. I'll pose a question to you. First Solar is involved in a massive scale-up of your U.S. manufacturing capacity, as is Nextracker. Can you give us a kind of overview of, A, what you're doing, but the decision process strategies to get there, but then also how you supported local supply chain partners, for example, in glass and other industries to build up your capacity?
Yeah. So I appreciate it. With the background you have, I'm not sure why you invited me, Dan. I think you can cover it very well. I do feel like a big partner of Nextracker. But first, I'd like to congratulate Atkore and Nextracker for an amazing decision to build domestic manufacturing. As you well know, I'm a bit biased towards domestic manufacturing, and hopefully the work that is happening with Heather will push towards more of this happening. It's a great advantage, not only by creating jobs, but the transparency that domestic manufacturing, the resiliency that we can create is great. And the market needs it. And I hope we can see a lot more of this and celebrate a lot more of these events. So kudos to you guys. First Solar is not too long ago, we had 2.5 gigawatt of capacity. That was a lot of alumni over here from First Solar will agree with me. Today we're talking about 16 gigawatts of total capacity that First Solar produces. And if we close on a couple of small decisions, we can get up to 20 gigawatts worldwide. So just to show you how fast we can grow, and we're trying to put our money where our mouth is by creating domestic manufacturing. Now we have Malaysia, we have Vietnam, and we decided to open one in India, but we have 3 factories in Ohio, and we're thinking of a 4th factory. It will be outside of the state, most likely outside of the great state of Ohio. So we supported around 40 gigawatts of worldwide deployment. We talked about the technology a little bit. Thin film is the only different technology than your normal crystalline silicon. And the entitlement of the technology will take us a lot further. A lot of people doubted the efficiencies. We're now talking about 18.5, 19. We can take it to 22, 23 as the technology evolves. So we're excited about that. We spent close to $2 billion in the US around manufacturing. But more importantly, we employ 2,500 people. From an ecosystem perspective, we spent $3 billion with about 30,000 US suppliers. That equates to about 15,000 jobs that this ecosystem creates. I just want to highlight to you kind of like what the domestic manufacturing means and the ecosystem around it. Dan mentioned we depend a lot, obviously, on glass. So we bring a lot of the glass floats closer to the factories. So you'll find a lot of the glass floats in Ohio. And if we open up in different states, we'll be looking for glass floats as one of them. Obviously, different materials that we procure, again, to the tune of billions of dollars as we go forward. Arizona is very close and dear to our heart. The Phoenix mayor is not here. We're headquartered in Tempe, I guess greater Phoenix. And we like what the mayor is doing. We supported some of the biggest plants in Arizona, all the way from Agua Caliente. I don't know if people remember Agua Caliente. All of these factories with Nextracker. We have the Sunstream, basically, portfolio. Everyone's basically handling it based on First Solar. There's few other plants. So Arizona is huge for us, headquarters here, but also doing a lot of work with Arizona projects along with Nextracker. So we're excited about this event, and hopefully we can do a lot more together.
Great. I really appreciate that, George. And folks, we're trying to evangelize the story about U.S. manufacturing. Feel free as the event goes on today to amplify the event in social media or whatever feels appropriate. Cynthia, Wang, you have 2 decades of experience in supply chain leadership, including work at McKinsey. We first met when you were in supply chain at SunEdison, which at the time was the largest developer in the world by far. Really appreciated the opportunity to work with you then. Now you're at SoftBank Energy US, which has quickly gone from basically zero to one of the top 5 developer owners of solar power assets in the United States.
Yeah.
We'd be interested in hearing about your perspective, given your background on how you're thinking about supply chain across the spectrum and what you see as the challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, thank you, Dan. My pleasure to be here. A little bit of introduction about our company. So SoftBank Energy was entered into U.S. into 2019 through acquisition. We acquired 5 projects for 1.7 gigawatts of large utility projects in Texas and California. Of course, with Nextracker tracker and First solar panels. So Dan is asking me about supply chain. Before I go there, Dan, I have to say, wow, that's amazing what I'm seeing in front of me for the U.S. manufacturing. I remember in 2014 when I represented SunEdison to sign the first 1 gigawatts volume with Nextracker, Dan was passionately showing about the Nextracker product. I remember one thing he's passionately demonstrating. Look, we don't need such a long, back panel holder. We only need half of the lens. He's going to save half of the money. Then he changed the entire industry standard. That is amazing. So back then we bet on Nextracker. 8 years later, you guys become one of the largest players in the world. That is really amazing. So talking about, supply chain risks or challenges, I'm sure there are a lot of supply chain folks here. Have you guys had fun in the past 2.5 years? Have you slept tight when you see the news about the war, right? It is an amazing experience for me in an interesting way. So in my 2 decades of experience, I've never seen something like this. To be honest, we are lucky for when the pandemic hit, we have to fund 1.7 gigawatts. But because of Nextracker and because of First Solar support, our last project is going to be interconnected in about a month. I've seen the efforts they've done for us as true partners with Speedy Boat. Now, Dan, you don't need that anymore with U.S. manufacturing. All around the world, I remember in conversation with George about it, George is like, okay, you got it, Cynthia. We're going to hijack, joke, the solar panels from Long Beach. No problem. But because of all the efforts, we made our projects happen. So what I've seen, I don't need to explain what's going on in the past 2 years. You guys are living it. We'll continue living it. We just thought at the beginning of the year, everything's going to be better. But, then Russian-Ukraine war starts, which is crazy. That drive commodity price going further up, right? So for me, if you ask me to predict the supply chain future, that's a question my boss asked me every day. I told him, hey, Abhijit, if I know that, I would have quit my job to be a very successful trader. So you wouldn't have me. So what I see, look at the world right now, I think the supply chain, given what's going on for pandemic, for the war, it will be more regionalized. I think supply chain, Nextracker definitely made a right move. In U.S., we do need a regional U.S. supply chain, and we do need, the supply chain to be able to scale. In order to make that happen, it's all of the efforts from all of you here that we buy U.S.-made product to support First Solar as well as Nextracker. But on top of that, most importantly, I think the policy support is mandatory. Then we are really looking forward to see there's a certainty of policy, then all of them can invest even the next hundreds million, 200 million, $1 billion in the manufacturing here.
When let's just say the proverbial material hit the fan about 1.5 years ago, we saw steel more than double in 3 months. Logistics triple into some markets to get material in. At that time, steel in the United States was over $2,000 a ton, where overseas it was under $1,000 a ton. That's the moment we decided to scale U.S. manufacturing. How could we do that and make the products affordably? Well, we undertook a strategic discussion with the mills to basically say, look, the spot is over 2,000, but we need to take the long view with great partners like Atkore and integrate in the logistics savings and the speed and the certainty and all the commotion. We heard this morning Scott Canada from McCarthy speaking about the impacts, hundreds of people on a job site waiting for material. That has real cost. And so the conversation's less about what's the cheapest place I can get it. It's about what is an affordable but supply security and continuity and schedule management and cost certainty way for us to establish that. So we'll come back to that. Thank you, Cynthia.
Dan, may I just jump on this just a bit? When we sat down to do a business case where to put a factory, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, we used to sit down and think through labor, think through material, think through a lot of the traditional ways to think about where to build a factory. Today, with the oceanic basically freight, and just to build on Dan's, we're selling the modules at 30 cents, sub 30 cents a watt. Freight used to be 2 cents of that. Today we're getting not only the uncertainties of getting the equipment to Cynthia or not, having to run sweepers, having to run, lock containers, ships, one has nothing to do with the other. There are some shipments that will cost us between 5 and 8 cents on a 30 cents or less module. So it's easy business case right now. Put the factories closer to your customers.
Yeah.
And that's, again, why this is fantastic. And you're going to see a lot more of that. Independent of what happens in Washington or not, the business case makes a lot of sense because it's an important factor on top of making great jobs around. So just wanted to elaborate on that.
And just to build on your build for a second, look, what goes up could come down, okay? And so we could have container rates drop from their hugely inflated value today back to it. What our mutual challenges, for us, Nextracker, working with Atkore and our other supply chain partners is, right now we're scaling and making early investments in these factories. We need to really focus on operational excellence to get that incremental cost down so that even if logistics comes back down, we can still work with our customers to keep building in the States. And so we need to really take back manufacturing content across the board here. Justin Johnson, Chief Operating Officer of Arrivant, really appreciate you joining us, and thank you for your military service as well. You're in the Air Force, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
thank you for that. I'll tell you a quick story. My dad served active combat duty in World War II. He wanted to fly airplanes off aircraft carriers, and I'm really glad that didn't happen, but or I may not be here. But anyway, he was like, well, I joined the Navy and asked to, get trained up on the planes, but he said, then I found out I had to be in the Air Force. I'm like, okay, well, maybe that was a good outcome. Anyway, but thanks for that. So Arrivant, as SoftBank is one of the top 5 owner-developers of solar power assets in the United States. Can you share with us how your offtake customers are thinking about this supply chain new reality that we're all dealing with and trying to optimize, come up with solutions for, and how you think about that as you price forward into contracts, and also what the kind of spectrum of thinking is? I'm sure it's not one uniform voice there.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Dan, and thank you to Atkore and Nextracker for a great event and a great partnership that I think will go a lot towards answering that question you asked. Arrivant is also based here in the Phoenix area, and as Dan said, we're one of the largest owners of solar in the U.S. I was doing some quick math, and I think we have about 5 million of those panels you see installed around the U.S., and we have about 10 million panels total, and I'd say probably half of them are installed on Nextracker's tracker. So it's a great partnership. When I look to my left here, Troy and his team do the operations and maintenance for many of our plants. Nextracker provides a tracker, and I buy all the panels that George will sell me. So all of that goes into our customer, are the utilities and any big commercial buyers of power. And I think what COVID and then Ukraine and all of these logistics issues, commodity constraints have really taught our customers and us, to be honest, is that security of, certainty of the price that we can offer them in terms of the power price, and certainty on when we can have the planet built and operating. There's a lot of value and importance to that. In the last few years, that certainty has kind of gone away. So when you look at our customer buying power from us, they're starting to think about that price in a more risk-adjusted sense. Maybe they can get a little bit lower power price from someone else, but what is the risk-adjusted aspect of that power price? Where are their supplies coming from? Where are the modules coming from? Where are the trackers coming from? Where are the bits and pieces that go into building those plants coming from? Because when you start digging into those details, some supply chain solutions certainly have more risk than others in terms of the schedule that you're going to deliver the plant on and the ultimate cost of that plant. I don't think we're there yet with all the off-takers and convincing them of that, but I think a lot of the owners like us are having the same conversations all around the U.S. with different customers and working to convince them that it's likely a better outcome for all of us if we take that into account and consider the risks of our supply chain decisions and how we can deliver affordable power to Americans around the U.S.
Yeah, appreciate that. I'm going to speak for a moment about the latest wrinkle we had in supply chain, which started with a shooting war that Mr. Putin perpetrated on Ukraine and what that meant for us. While I'm talking about that, I'd encourage our other panelists to be thinking about questions you might want to ask each other or directions to take the conversation. We're going to kind of open it up. So we have a lot of capacity in Nextracker, like something like 700 megawatts a week of capacity overseas. We're building out in the States now 10 gigawatts a year in the States that can supply everything, in terms of demand for these products. We were, entering into upstream relationships on the mills. And then in February, Putin unleashed this war in Ukraine. We saw, we're for the States, for our U.S. projects, we can source with U.S. steel, right? Well, that's okay, but the electric arc furnace technology steel, it still needs pig iron. The largest importer of pig iron is the United States, and the largest exporter is Ukraine. Ukraine's also a major provider of zinc to the world. So we saw a lot of escalation on that, and that further informed our thinking about entering into longer-term contracts with our suppliers. Here's some other things that happened in the global steel industry. 10% of the steel production in Ukraine and Russia basically became unavailable. I think you all have seen the horrible pictures about the 6 million ton a year mill in Mariupol that the Russians bombed to oblivion. But additionally, Russia started using gas as a strategic political weapon in their supply into Europe. And the power price in Europe went up by a factor of 5. And so what happened is a number of the steel mills in Spain stopped producing because it wasn't economic for them to produce. We had a lot more capacity come offline. So things are pretty volatile out there. And what we're moving toward is more, we're thinking longer term stability and the value of that stability for all our collective customers. The other thing I'll just say is from a demand standpoint, it's really hard to predict how the steel demand is going to happen and the supply is going to happen. China by far is the largest producer of steel. They're also the largest consumer of steel. But even in the States, secondary things can make a big impact. For example, automobile sector is the second largest consumer of steel. Their production is constrained right now because of computer chip shortages. There's a big backlog of cars. When's that going to debottleneck? I don't know. It's a little hard to gauge. But I guess what I'm saying is there's value for us. We see the value in working with our partners to go further upstream, longer term, and then to have mechanisms in so everyone's reasonably protected as things move around, because certainly in my career, we've never experienced the volatility we've had in the last year. Manufacturing, I'm with George. Making product closer to market at the end of the day is the single best thing you can do. Right now, Nextracker, we're manufacturing in 9 or 10 countries at huge scale. And so that's what we're doing to be able to serve our global market. Okay, I'd like to open it up to some kind of cross-questioning here. Oh, sorry, Troy.
I'm just the pretty face up here.
Gotcha. All right. So Troy, it's really my privilege to have you here. So Troy Lauterbach is the Chief Executive Officer of Novasource Power Systems. Novasource Power is the largest operator for operations and maintenance and asset management in the world, with over 16 gigawatts, you'll correct me on the exact number, in operation. I've had the pleasure of working with Troy, not only in the current capacity, but going back to SunPower about 12 years ago, when you helped advance our monitoring system, the SCADA system, the System Operations Center. You took that expertise actually to First Solar and helped them build one of the a really world-class platform there. First Solar ultimately decided to sell that business. You merged with some other businesses that we'd been involved with at SunPower, building operations and maintenance to create this Novasource power. So first, congratulations on that and the other acquisitions you've done.
Thank you.
And I'd like to, we've been talking a lot about supply chain, but you're involved a lot in data. And I'd like to ask you how availability and use of information has advanced the cost effectiveness and practice of actually operating solar power systems.
Thank you, Dan. I'd like to start off and echoing my fellow panel members and congratulating you and the Atkore team on everything you've accomplished here. If I could take the liberty for 30 more seconds and just call attention to my green ribbon on my lapel here, that's in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, which is super important these days, something that's a passion point for me. Some journeys we get to choose, other journeys we're choosing for, and in this particular case, my journey with mental health has been one that I've sorted out in the last 5 years, but really went 20 years in denial of it. And in reality, 1 in 5 people in the U.S. Are faced with this. And so I'm calling attention to it. If you read the headlines, Washington Post yesterday talked about 5 tragic suicides amongst college athletes that have happened in the last semester here. It's really important, just like we started 25 years ago, having a dialogue in the schools and with our kids about sustainability and look at what's come from that we're having the same dialogue with them about mental health and mental health awareness. So thank you guys for that. On the topic of data, so Novasource is the world's largest provider of solar O&M services. We operate over 20 gigawatts in 9 countries, and we've got 1,000 employees dedicated to making sure that every photon that leaves the sun gets delivered in the form of a renewable, sustainable, clean electron to the grid. And so we're really excited about that. And what's even more exciting, we've got customers like Justin who we're able to deliver those services for, but we are the aggregator of data. And in being the aggregator of data, we are also the truth tellers for the industry. That makes sure that what Dan sells, what George sells, is what actually gets delivered. And so what we're seeing now in this 20 gigawatts of data that we've aggregated over 15 years operational history are some really interesting trends that somewhat are counterintuitive to what you would naturally think as a industry matures. So one of the things we're seeing in particular on the inverter side is that new inverter technology is actually less reliable than the legacy technology that's deployed. And we specifically are seeing in that first 12 to 24 months a real steep fall off in performance relative to these assets. And so for customers like Cynthia, she'll tell you her pro forma is the most sensitive to performance in the first and second year of operation, and yet that's being countered with less reliable systems and assets. And I think it's a direct correlation to the strain that is being put on the industry relative to continue to consolidate costs, deliver at a lower price. And some of the nice to haves in the technology are actually getting stripped out and are turning out to be have to have. So what we're really focused on is working with partners and OEM partners like Nextracker, who today is the lowest cost of operation of any tracker system within the ecosystem that we operate, about 50% less than their next largest competitor. And that is a direct correlation to the type of technology and the way they deploy it without the ganged tracker. Gives a lot more freedom of movement, but it's also really a show that the commitment to quality and reliability that we need as an industry to have Heather go advocate for us as the safest, most reliable, highest quality, lowest cost, sustainable technology in the market. We have a responsibility as Novasource to deliver that data to our customers, to the industry, to equip everyone so that This little hiccup that we're experiencing right now is just that, and the long-term projected capacity of 40% of the U.S. power supply coming from solar by the year 2035 is the focus that we all should be looking at.
Thanks for that. Okay, with that, I'm going to open it up, and do you all have questions for each other?
Dan,
please.
For me, I completely echo what Troy just mentioned. As a IPP that we grow at the trajectory 2.5 gigawatts per year, by 2025, probably 10 gigawatts asset under management. It is really challenging these days, based on what Troy to say, that you look at the industry has driven companies to continue to give cost reduction in a fast pace in the past 10 years or 20 years. That's what I'm seeing. While at this point, people will start to, like companies like us, is how about reliability? Would I pay a penny more if it is more reliable? Today, I will answer, of course, because once the plant is up and running, every second that it stops working, whether blow up or potentially equipment doesn't work, it is a huge impact for us. I think one of the good things that I've seen, or slightly more positive due to the supply chain crisis worldwide, the war, all these chaos we're dealing with, it make all of us work across the chain, like operator, manufacturer, to rethink about, how we should shape solar industry. Yes, we need to continue to drive LCOE low to make the renewable energy affordable in order to, we don't want an individual household, companies pay higher and higher bill because of renewable energy. That's a common goal we are driving together to drive the LCOE low. But does it mean it's lower CapEx? Are there any other way we should work together? For example, react fast to the reality. Like Dan said, or George mentioned, regionalize the supply chain, really focus on innovation, focus on reliability of the product, and focus on driving the cost down through innovation instead of driving the cost down for doing a shortcut. It is not right to design a new inverter or release a new tracker every 6 months or have a new solar panel every 6 months. It's too demanding. I think we need to really, sit down to rethink about it, in every piece of the whole chain about how we're going to get there with lower LCOE. Yeah, that's my view.
Well, to continue the important journey of having the women ask the questions here, I will follow on and ask an open question to the panelists. One of the things that I think a lot about as the head of the American Clean Power Association is what do we need to do today to create larger market share for clean energy. But we also need to recognize that we're going to continue to grow and there's going to be continued headwinds as that growth expands. What are some of the things that keep you awake at night as you think about deployment and further decarbonization of the power sector?
Yeah, I would say we have some, the temporary hurdles and short-term stuff we've all dealt with, whether it's like buying a vehicle or whatever the last few years that COVID and other things have cost. But I do think the future for solar energy is, it's very, very bright, very strong because it is so affordable. And it's such in demand from our customers, from utilities, from other large consumers of electricity, that once we get these supply chain issues worked out, I think one of the potential bottlenecks or constraints is just, will we have enough labor, will we have enough people to go install it to meet all those objectives every year? And, McCarthy was up here earlier, they're a big constructor. I think that's where there's a huge opportunity and a large demand for future jobs and need to go and meet our solar targets in the years to come.
I maybe just pile onto that, exactly the same. That's on the tech side. Our biggest constraint to growth right now is just qualified, trained technicians. I think maybe expanding on that, one of my personal observations and concerns relative to the industry, and I really applaud you for having your head of D&I here, is we've got to get more diversity and especially gender inclusion into this industry. Right now, we only have about 18% of our workforce that is female, and that's not by intention. Part of that is technicians traditionally and generally are a more male-oriented group. But with that said, we don't have great programmatic ways to bring females in, and not just bring them in, but bring them in and develop them to a higher level in their career. So I think that's another important thing, not just the general need for labor, but making sure that we're creating opportunities for those that may not have the same opportunity as the rest of us that sometimes take that for granted.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioned that, Troy. Some friends of ours at Sol Systems created Renewables Forward, and Nextracker was an early supporter on that. We're pretty engaged on it, and we want our workforce to really reflect the community. And we've done some initial things like we have a referral bonus if a Nextracker employee recommends somebody that gets hired. We've doubled that for women and diversity candidates, but it's still hard. I mean, our progress is slow. And so I would just, in answer your question, Heather, take a little bit of a different, or let's say complementary perspective. I think one of our greatest challenges in renewables going to really high penetration has been about communication and mind share and bandwidth. Like, there's a lot of disinformation out there and a lot of misunderstandings about how the energy sector works. I bet if you polled people, they wouldn't think that solar is the lowest cost way to generate power almost everywhere on Earth now, and certainly here in the Sun Belt. People do say they want their energy to come from the sun more than any other source. There's a lot of, especially in this age we're in, vested interests that want to put disinformation out there about energy and how that works. So I think for me, the communication piece and doing things like this today and then evangelizing those messages, I think is really, really important to get the narrative right.
Yeah, I'll second what Dan is saying. Say it a little differently also. What keeps me up at night is, number one, we know the industry is going to grow tremendously. There's new applications like hydrogen, ammonia, a lot of things that's going to drive solar, renewables in general that are out there. Coupled with the fact that it is the lowest cost today. As a matter of fact, I challenge lowering LCOE anymore. I think we're there. So just stay there. But having said that, what we find ourselves divided, and I don't want to get too philosophical, you know, with traditional generation versus renewable. That is tough by itself to have a comprehensive energy strategy as a country. But also, worse than that, we find ourselves divided in the renewable sector by looking at short-term issues versus understanding the growth, tremendous growth that the market and the opportunity is in front of us. And that's really what I feel. Going back to the communication, go back to coalescing. I've seen the industry coalesce, and we drove, I think McCarthy said it today, from $3 a watt to less than $1. I mean, when we coalesce, we can achieve anything. But when we're divided, unfortunately, and not to mention, the renewable sector is still not fully accepted up in Washington. So you have that divide, and then us divided amongst our house keeps me up at night. So I will, from my side, we'll do whatever it takes to achieve the long-term strategy.
Appreciate that. Okay, switching gears a little bit. So one of the nice things about solar is you can kind of put it almost anywhere. And so we're more distributed. But still, one of the challenges for the industry is getting enough electric transmission capacity, big power lines to get power from point A to point B, especially if you're building in the deserts. So Heather shared something with me last night that kind of snapped my head back. As part of the bipartisan infrastructure package, which is law, there's going to be the largest investment in electric transmission build-out that's ever happened. Can you take that a little further, Heather, and speak to that?
Sure. Well, I mean, for starters, one of the exciting things about the bipartisan infrastructure law is that it is bipartisan. There were a lot of members on both sides of the aisle that came together and said, we recognize that if we're going to decarbonize the power sector, we have significant needs when it comes to transmission, and we cannot let that be an Achilles heel to the broader deployment. At the same time, transmission policy and figuring out what you do in Washington versus an RTO or at the state level is really complicated. But we were able to work directly with Congress to identify a suite of new tools. So the overall package is over $50 billion. For the transmission and grid upgrades, that is $20 billion, which is the largest investment in the nation's electric grid in the history of the grid, which is exciting. And a lot of these programs are actually happening to enhance resilience, to ensure additional deployment. And, I think it's with the broad recognition that last year, we only built a little around 300 miles of transmission versus a typical year where you build 1,800, which reminds us all that it's getting a lot harder to build big energy projects in the United States. So we need to have important things like backstop authority at the Department of Energy so that we can actually use eminent domain and some of the other tools to get these transmission lines built. We're going to work very closely with the department because it's one thing in Washington to pass legislation. It's another thing to actually figure out how to implement it in an effective manner. So we're working very closely with the department on that. But I would really encourage you, to the extent that you are playing in the transmission space or even some of the clean energy programs that are running through at a state level. There are a lot of grant programs. There's a lot of opportunity. There are a lot of dollars being pushed directly to the states. I think there's a lot of area of opportunity. And if you just look at the Biden 2035 target, we have to increase and build out the grid by 60% by 2035. And right now, we are basically going backwards. It's taking longer to site the project development. It's taking longer. So any of the tools available to help reduce costs, to help deploy new grid technologies, and to give between the Department of Energy and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission these new tools and figure out how we can work as an industry collectively with government to deploy them for our best use is really what we're focused on right now in Washington.
Just out of my personal curiosity, Heather, what will be the duration to deploy it? Because we do see, like, as the IPP, like interconnection queue in California gets longer and longer. So we can build projects, but we want to know when we can interconnect.
Yeah,
So
it's a great question, and no good panel happens without talking about an interconnection queue. But what makes this package a little bit different is, unlike the Recovery Act, where it was like you have a year or maximum of 2 to spend it, this is over a 5 to 10 year timeline. So I'm actually optimistic that because these are longer programs and we're not just going to have to like figure out how to put shoestring and chewing gum together to like push money out the door. They're trying. The goal is to be really effective and focus on how do we actually make sure we're putting points on the board. And, I think there are additional things that are happening within FERC on the interconnection queue that are there's this broad recognition that nobody, like whether it's PJM putting a pause on additional new projects or just the amount of backlog that exists. I had an opportunity to bring the chairman of FERC to San Antonio last week, and we talked about this. And I think some of the proposed rules and some of the new regulations that FERC is considering are also going to go a long way to helping with that, in addition to the provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Thank you.
We really want to thank you all for your support coming here today. Atkore couldn't ask for a better partner. We're looking forward to, cranking things up here and in your Chicago facility. We've got the orders. There's no question about that. And so thank you all for being part of this and joining us today. And George flew here from Florida. Other people made special trips from out of state. So thank you all very, very much. Give it up for Atkore.